The following is a production of Professor Robert Barnwell. Each episode includes insights provided by the chairman, CEOs, and CFOs of the world's most successful corporations, as well as thought leaders from premier business schools and international consultancies. If you and your team would like more information on corporate leadership and strategic management, or would like to learn more about Professor Barnwell, his research, and how he may be able to assist your company, please visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com.
Hello and welcome to CFO Talk Radio. I'm your host, Robert Barnwell. During the last episode, we spoke with Gary Kokens. Gary is a manager of global business advisory services involved with performance management solutions at SAS and is an internationally recognized expert on advanced cost management and performance improvement systems. Gary joined us to discuss some of the fundamental principles of activity-based costing and activity-based management. This is episode 20, and we'll be speaking with Professor Robert S. Kaplan, the Baker Foundation Professor at Harvard Business School and co-creator, together with David P. Norton, of the Balanced Scorecard. Professor Kaplan has agreed to join us for a special two-part program. This first episode will explore some of the fundamental principles which underlie the Balanced Scorecard. So Bob, welcome to CEO and CFO Talk Radio.
I'm glad that I'm able to appear with you.
Well, we're really happy to have you on the program, and I'm sure that most listeners have heard of the Balanced Scorecard, and many likely have some type of scorecard or dashboard in their own organizations. If you could, would you please remind listeners what the Balanced Scorecard is and why it was such a radical concept when it first appeared on the scene during the early 1990s, and perhaps maybe share with us an example or two of the early successes from the Balanced Scorecard.
We introduced the Balanced Scorecard based on a research project that Dave Norton led in his then role as CEO of the Nolan Norton Consulting Company. I was the academic advisor to that. The goal of that research program, which was done with about a dozen companies, was to think about how to measure performance and value for late 20th and now 21st century enterprises, where the value doesn't come from the physical or financial assets that appear on a company's balance sheet, but from its intangible assets, which financial accounting does a miserable job of accounting for by basically ignoring it. And we felt if you don't measure something, you can't manage it, and if you don't manage it, you can't improve it. And if an organization's intangible assets were the key to long-term sustainable success, we needed a measurement system that would enable companies to understand how they're doing with mobilizing and deploying their intangible assets. So that was the goal, and during the course of this one-year research study, we did come up with what has come to be called the Balanced Scorecard. And there were non-financial measures before, particularly coming out of the quality movement, which is I was working in, and so certainly organizations were beginning to measure defects and yields and cycle times and lead times and on-time delivery. But these were really all operational and tactical measures designed to foster the continuous improvement that was at the heart of the quality movement. The innovation of the Balanced Scorecard is that the non-financial measures were really critical for understanding the performance of an entire enterprise. And we retained the financial measures, and they serve their role, and in the long term, or the way we do keep score that a company's strategy is a good one and being implemented well. But for short-term measurements, you can't rely only on financial measures for the reasons I stated. And so we introduced three other dimensions to measure. The second, one beyond financial were customers. Who are our targeted customers, and what's the differentiating value proposition we're offering to succeed with them? And then the third is a process perspective. once we understood the expectations for shareholders and customers, what are the critical processes that we need to excel at to drive value for both of those external constituents. And the final one, which the name evolved over several years but came to be called the learning and growth, is really where we put the most intangible of an organization's asset, primarily the employees, their human capital capabilities, but also reflecting at where we were at the end of the 20th century, the role for information and databases and understanding of processes and customers, as well as perhaps the most intangible of all, which is organizational culture and climate. So that was the balanced scorecard, these four perspectives: financial, customer, process, and learning and growth. And I might say if I had to do anything over again, I might have wished I had called that fourth perspective talent and technology, which I think is a little bit more descriptive and more alliterative. So we published the ideas in a January 1992 Harvard Business Review article, and almost immediately we did get calls from organizations saying, we agree with you, that we definitely need this type of comprehensive, systematic measurement system to drive value creation, and can you help us and work with us to implement your ideas? And while I'm an academic and don't have a lot of time for that, fortunately my co-author and collaborator, David Norton, is head of consulting firms, and so that was a natural. And Dave started to work with about a half a dozen organizations, and fortunately each of them proved to be a great success in the implementation of the idea and in helping us learn more about them. And so among these were Cigna Property and Casualty Company, which at the time Dave started to work with them was the least profitable P&C company in the U.S., and within 3 years had become one of the most profitable. Second one was a division of the Brown and Root Company, which itself was a division of Halliburton, which did underwater construction for hydrocarbons, oil and gas found underneath the water, and they did a lot of the installation, construction, and logistics for the major oil companies. And this company, Rockwater, used the approach to really articulate a new value proposition to its key customers, not just competing on low price, but on value added to the customer. And that turned out to be very good success. And a third I can mention was Mobil in the U.S., Marketing and Refining Company, which, like Cigna, was performing at the bottom of its industry, and an executive team wanted to introduce change, a new strategy, a new organizational structure, and realized that as part of that transformational change, they needed a new measurement system, not just one related to revenues and expense management. And the new strategy, again, was a differentiating one, going at top-tier end-use consumers who would be willing to pay more for the purchase of gasoline if they had a better buying experience. And the balanced scorecard gave them a wonderful way to measure what they were trying to do with their customers and what the value proposition was in terms of a superior buying experience, and got all the employees to focus on the critical processes to create and deliver that value proposition, develop a better dealer network, lower costs in the non-differentiated part of their business, which was basically refining and distribution. And within 2 years, Mobil had become the most profitable company in its industry and sustained that for 5 years. So through these experiences, we came to understand better the concept we had introduced and also got validation that it was working.
Bob, those are some really terrific success stories. Now, as you've mentioned, unlike traditional measures of performance indicators, which have largely been financial, the balanced scorecard encompasses really four distinct perspectives: financial, customer, internal operations, and then learning and growth, which is largely employee-focused. How would you compare and perhaps contrast the balanced scorecard needs and individual performance indicators used in maybe a manufacturing environment versus, let's say, maybe a business service such as consulting?
There's really not much difference at all. All the companies have customers. They should have a strategy that indicates which customers are more valuable than the others, and therefore they have to align their processes and excel at processes that deliver that value proposition to their targeted customers. And this is true whether you're manufacturing widgets or you're a professional services firm or another type of services firm. It's really, you have customers, you have processes, and you have people. And you need to get those all aligned and working towards common goals. So there's really virtually no difference between manufacturing or services organizations in the implementation of the scorecard. Now, any given organization could have different metrics, but there's as much variation between manufacturers as there would be between manufacturing and services companies. I mean, clearly services companies won't have inventory and manufacturers will, so you might expect that you'll have some inventory-related measures for manufacturing that you wouldn't find in a services firm, but that's in the details. There's no conceptual difference in implementing the scorecard between the two types of organizations.
All right. Well, again, the book first appeared during the mid-1990s, and as you mentioned, the seminal article on which it was based predated the book by only a year or two. So in the 15 years or so that have gone by since the initial publication of the article and book, in what ways has the balanced scorecard and the use of the balanced scorecard evolved?
Well, we've extended the domain of enterprises to which we've applied it. Starting in about 1996, we started to work with both nonprofit and public sector organizations, and that's been a huge sector for application because they needed it actually more than the private sector. In the private sector, at least the financial measures, if you look over a long enough period of time, are a good measure of accountability and performance for the organizations. But in the nonprofit or the public sector, doing well financially has nothing to do with whether you do well with your mission. And the converse is also true. You could be doing a great job with your constituents and running a deficit. So even more than the private sector, nonprofits and public sector organizations have embraced this approach. It's giving them a much more relevant and powerful way of guiding and evaluating their performance. And this has been very gratifying just to see how many nonprofits around the world are using this to deliver better value to their constituents, how many government agencies, and in fact entire governments, are using this approach. So that was certainly a significant advance. In terms of the technical aspects of the scorecard itself, starting in the mid to late 90s, we began to use strategy maps much more, and in fact, that's now the front end of any project. Before we get to any measures in a balanced scorecard, we always construct a strategy map, and I'm anticipating that that's something you want to do in the next segment, so I won't go into that here. I would say that even with our first book, which was published in 1996, the least developed part of the balanced scorecard was the learning and growth perspective. So we had put a place marker in the scorecard for metrics related primarily to people, but also information systems and culture. And this is where companies struggled the most. One CEO called the learning and growth the black hole of the balanced scorecard because the metrics were so inadequate. But starting about 10 years ago, we started to work with human resource executives and departments, and from that we actually did develop some much better ways of thinking about the performance and alignment of human capital. And this led to an article in Harvard Business Review somewhere around 2005 about measuring the strategic readiness of your intangible assets. And so we now can identify the skills and capabilities that employees need to have in order to excel at the critical processes. And that led to an entirely new metric, which is the percentage of employees in critical job families who have the requisite skills, experience, and capabilities to perform at an exceptional level in those processes that are at the heart of the strategy. So that was really kind of a major advance in the measurement and management of human capital. We've seen the idea expand into the new form of reporting, triple bottom line reporting. So I wrote a case on an organization that really wanted to be responsive to this triple bottom line reporting, which is economic performance and also environmental and social performance, and the flexibility of the scorecard adapts very well to handle that more robust measurement system. We also learned, and I think we'll cover this in the next segment, that the system does not run itself, and that we needed to develop a cadre of internal people who had particular expertise in strategy map and balanced scorecard, and working with organizations to build and sustain their scorecards. And so we formulated this new structure called an Office of Strategy Management that has really turned out to be a very important idea that's been adopted by organizations all over the world to sustain and keep relevant the measurement and management system. And having, given you a bunch of these significant advances, probably the biggest advance, which we will talk about subsequently, is the shift in focus from using the balanced scorecard as a performance measurement or a performance management system, which is where Dave Norton and I started in 1990, in which our 1992 HBR article was all about, and a shift from that to using this as the central system in an organization for strategy execution. And this was definitely something we learned from several of the early adopting organizations that Dave worked with. And we just saw them using the scorecard in a far more powerful way than we had originally imagined it when we were just thinking in terms of performance measurement and performance management.
Yeah, I have to agree that, in terms of my experience as a practitioner and a researcher on strategy execution and change management issues, I really can't think of a stronger tool than the balanced scorecard or the performance dashboard that a company or an organization adapts. So certainly, you're preaching to the choir, as far as that's concerned. Now, as you've mentioned, you and your colleagues are regularly called upon by companies around the world to help construct a balanced scorecard system, and then to help these companies cascade the system throughout their organization. And you touched upon the strategy map, and I'd like to ask, in addition perhaps to the strategy map, what are some of the questions or issues that you recommend that senior executives consider when working toward the adoption of the balanced scorecard system?
Okay, so let me, rather than say what it's for, which I will get to, I think it's crisper to say, when do I get worried about when organizations are implementing the scorecard, that they're using it the wrong way. And so and primarily, the biggest problem is when they just see this as a way to make their compensation system more robust, whereas before the compensation was just related to short-term financial measures. Then we give them, they're going to use the scorecard to say, okay, we're going to measure customer satisfaction, we're going to measure quality, and we're going to measure employee satisfaction, and so we'll add that onto the incentive system for senior managers. And while customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and quality are all good things to have, and I think that it does improve probably the incentive and compensation system, there's a very limited focus, because just doing that does not really fundamentally change the way the organization is doing business. So where it's least successful is where it's being introduced by HR consultants or HR departments to do a narrow job, just to expand the number of measures that we can incentivize and reward employees on. So what should they be doing? Well, they should be doing it, especially when they're moving into a new strategy. People are used to the old strategy. They're probably pretty good at doing that, and they probably even have evolved non-financial measures that keep them on track with the existing strategy. So we found the most powerful application arises when the CEO, and the leadership team recognizes the need to communicate and implement a new strategy. And at that point, the scorecard helps them describe and communicate that to all the employees, and also helps them monitor and implement the strategy. And that's really the critical role. And so if a leadership team is just adopting the scorecard to have a little bit more measures to look at, that's not a very good reason. They should really be doing this to help support a significant change in their organization, and recognizing that with financial measures alone, they can't describe the new strategy, they can't allocate resources against the new strategy, they can't motivate employees around the strategy, and they can't get feedback doing it that way. So we really, our client, in effect, our customer for adopting the balanced scorecard has to be the CEO and the leadership team. It can't be the HR organization or the IT organization or even the finance organization. If it's not the executive leadership team that wants this to be their system, they're just not going to get the potential in this approach.
All right. So basically what I'm hearing is that the company as an overarching entity needs to adopt the balanced scorecard. It can't be forced into a small niche, with HR around compensation. It really has to be an all-encompassing measure. And then, of course, it needs to be cascaded from top to bottom.
Yeah, no, and it left out one. I mean, what you could also, a quality group could say, we want the balanced scorecard because we want to motivate continuous improvement, all of which is a good idea, but it's still helping them in a tactical, operational way and not in a strategic way. And when I talk about an organization, it doesn't have to be the entire corporation. And we can work with a business unit, an operating company. And as long as we have the executive team of that operating company, we can create a great deal of value for them, even if the corporation as a whole doesn't do it. So, and typically the first project would be done with a strategic business unit with its own strategy and its set of customers and processes, and then do several business units and then migrate it up to the corporate level. And in fact, we even started with corporate staff departments, where the first implementation was for human resources or IT or finance. But even within that, the guiding principle has to be the head of human resources or the chief information officer or the chief financial officer who owns the project. And it's how do I develop a strategy for my staff function or shared service unit that delivers value to our customers, which in this case would be the internal business units in the corporation, and aligns my employees to delivering that value from our staff function.
Okay, well, that's an interesting point. Now, the focus of much of your work, along with David Norton's, is in tying the balanced scorecard to strategy, which we've discussed, and we'll spend much more time in during our subsequent program. But you touched upon another useful or another helpful use, rather, of the balanced scorecard, and that is in using the balanced scorecard to help determine budget and resource allocation. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Well, the primary feature we're getting there is that this is a defect that organizations had, we discovered, is that their strategy formulation and development process was done separately from their budgeting process. And different people were involved in the two processes, and senior executive team on an offsite to do the strategy formulation and update, and really the finance function running the budgeting process. So it was doing different people and actually different times of year, and often the budgeting process was done independently of the strategy process. And the budget at the time, for most companies, is the predominant system. And so if there's any tension or conflict between strategy and the budget, we know which is going to win out, which is going to be the budget. And the difficulty is that to implement a strategy, you need to invest in we call them strategic initiatives, but these are to enhance employee capabilities, develop new information and data systems, improve processes, develop new products and services, develop customer loyalty programs, improve customer relationships. And we need initiatives and projects to accomplish all of those. But the budgeting process is short-term, it's financial, and doesn't like a lot of discretionary spending. And what happened is that there's no resources, either money or people, that are explicitly identified to help implement projects and initiatives that are central to successful strategy execution. And so there was just this separation. And in fact, probably the targets in the budgeting were likely different than the targets that the executives may have articulated in the strategic planning process done several months earlier. So there's just inconsistency, a lack of coherence between the strategy process and the budgeting process, and the budgeting process will win out, and therefore strategies don't get implemented.
Well, Bob, many thanks for joining us today and sharing your experience and insights. We're really looking forward to speaking with you again next week in our follow-up discussion on the importance of strategy alignment with the Balanced Scorecard, as well as the use of the Balanced Scorecard as a strategy execution tool. So thanks again. That was Professor Robert S. Kaplan, the Baker Foundation Professor at Harvard Business School and co-creator, together with David P. Norton, of the Balanced Scorecard. Professor Kaplan has agreed to join us for a special two-part program. During this first episode, we discussed some of the fundamental principles which underlie the Balanced Scorecard. Please join us for our next episode when we speak with Professor Kaplan about using the Balanced Scorecard as a strategy development and execution tool. Until then, this is Robert Barnwell and CFO Talk Radio wishing you all the best.
We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and found the material of value. To download a transcript of this episode, receive a free subscription to the show, or to learn more about this subject, we encourage you to visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com to explore the many executive briefings, presentations, case studies, and other resources available for immediate download. This has been a production of Robert G. Barnwell. All rights reserved.